Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our latest episode, where I'm joined by Michael Greer, who's the president and CEO of ArtsFund. ArtsFund's a Seattle-based nonprofit founded in 1969, and they're an advocate for the arts and cultural sector in Seattle and really across our state, and they've distributed over $100 million to arts and cultural organizations since their founding. Michael joined ArtsFund as CEO in June of 2020. Prior to his role with ArtsFund, he was the executive director of the Oregon Ballet, and prior to that, the executive director of the Portland, Maine Ballet. He started his arts career in Salt Lake City as a dancer. And Michael and I discussed the work of ArtsFund, the state of the arts and cultural sector post-COVID here in downtown Seattle, and his own personal connections to art and culture and how it shaped his life experience and journey. Hope you enjoy my conversation with Michael Greer, the president and CEO of ArtsFund. You're very kind to do this with us. Thanks for coming over, Michael.
Well, thanks for the invitation, John.
Yeah, it was great to have you on. Seattle City Makers, and I forgot that you agreed to take this role in April of 2020, and you came up here in June, right? You started the role in June of 2020.
That was a different time, wasn't it?
What were you thinking when you were interviewing for a job in the arts? I mean, you were in the arts in Oregon as the executive director of the Oregon Ballet, right, before you came to Seattle.
Exactly.
But you're interviewing for a job in the arts sector that had just gotten more or less completely shut down.
Well, I'll tell you, the interviews started before COVID really came on. Mm-hmm. And so the first set of interviews that I had was before anyone really knew what was happening. And it's a funny story. I was at Oregon Ballet Theater where I was the executive director, and we were having some interviews, and I had a board member that was the Accenture, and he was doing some work over in China. And I remember he called me and said, "Hey, strap in. Like this is going to get wild."
Because of what was going on over there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, we were all kind of prepared for it. And then it hit. And of course, it hit Seattle first, and this was kind of the epicenter for a lot of that breaking news. And I remember thinking, oh well, that job opportunity is on hold. But the board chair at the time, to his credit, Tony Miles, called me and said, "Hey, we're game if you are." And I talked with the family, and we said, "Let's do it." Everything still held. The reasons that I wanted to be here, the reasons that I found the organization attractive, and the reasons that I found Seattle attractive were the same, COVID or not. And in actuality, I think, looking back on it, the idea of being able to make a difference in the sector, there was no better time to be a leader in the sector than, throughout that period. Because really, I mean, I was new, but there were so many leaders in this town, in the arts and otherwise, that were keeping us afloat. And it was really it was a really unique time to be a leader in this city.
How did you figure out what the board wanted from you in this role that was now really different from what you were originally hired to do? You showed up for a job that was a little different than the one you started interviewing with. And how did you find a new path with your board to serve the organization and your constituency?
Well, I actually don't know if the role was different. At ArtsFund, our mission is to support the arts through leadership, advocacy, and grant making in order to build a more healthy, equitable, and creative Washington. That was true during the pandemic. It's true now, right? And I think how to execute on that mission has changed several times, right?
Different approach
over the past couple of years. But that's one of the things I tell staff and board and donors and anyone that's engaging with the arts. It's like the mission. If the mission holds, then just keep working on that mission. And I think that's what saw so many of us through. And again, in the arts or otherwise, I think we all were rallying around this idea that Seattle is a place that we want to support, that we want to see thrive. And, whether you're in the arts or whether you're in real estate or whether you're in retail, the idea was that, we continue to double down on what we do in order to make this place better.
What originally drew you to Seattle and the opportunity?
Seattle's fantastic. I gotta admit. So my family and I've personally lived, 15, 16 different places across the world. And we, I spent about 11 years overseas in India and mainland China, and I'm from St. Louis originally, and bounced around.
As is our producer. Did you all did you compare notes on that?
Yeah, well, we've compared a number of notes on St. Louis and how it's a great place to be from, but the Pacific Northwest is a wonderful place to be. When you talk to a lot of people that have moved around a lot, I was just having a conversation yesterday at lunch with someone who had a similar background to me, and we said, if you asked me, where in the world would you like to live? And I could choose anywhere, Paris, Shanghai, London, Tokyo, I would say here. I mean, I think at this point in our lives, we could probably live wherever we wanted, and we choose Seattle because it really has absolutely everything. It's a great town for families. It's a great town for arts and culture. It's a great town for business. I mean, it just has absolutely everything, and it's stunning, right? I mean, there's no other city that really offers everything, in my opinion, that Seattle does.
Had you spent much time here before applying for the job?
No, I had not. We'd been in Portland, which was as far north. I'd lived in the Bay Area for a while in the past, but I keep creeping up the West Coast. And but when we came up here, we just thought this is everything, right? I mean, it's right any further north and it gets a little cold, and but right here, I think it really has. It's got the mountains, the ocean, the city. It's hard to beat.
And you and your family landed on Bainbridge Island.
That's correct.
Right? So you've got a nice little.
The commute is unlike anything else.
Yeah. How was it today coming over? Ferries on time?
Ferries on time.
Yeah.
We can keep working on that. But today it was on time. So no, but it's fantastic. The view is wonderful. The transit system in general is really good, and the fact that you can be on an island, you can be on the east side, you can be downtown, and still call this area your home. That's really impressive, and it says a lot about the infrastructure of the city.
Yeah, the balance we have here of big nature, big urban with great arts and culture and music, entertainment, and civic life and commerce, and then you can escape it all. In a 35-minute ferry ride or 20 minutes up I-90 to the other side of the urban growth boundary.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
How would you describe the state of our arts sector today?
So DSA, Downtown Seattle Association, did a great report here on that very question. And there's a lot to unpack there, right? There are kind of the hard facts that were put out in that study, and talking about more than 1/3 of the cultural spaces in Seattle are here in downtown, and like 2/3 of the employment is happening here in the downtown area. And then statewide, you're looking at 10.3% of Washington State's GDP comes from the art and culture sector. Like that's $72 billion in added value. So I mean, this is a huge sector, and the sector has had its difficulties, over the past several years, along with a lot of other sectors that are out there, and we are recovering. But the numbers are still showing that we're probably at about 80% of employment figures, compared to 2020. And when you're looking at ticketing, we're still waiting on the data to come in from this past year. But anecdotally, I think we're still looking at 70%, in terms of total revenue. So there is a struggle. We are recovering. But the other part that I think is really important, and we can dive into this a little bit more, is that as arts and culture goes, so does the city. It's one of those sectors that also supports so much else in the town. That what we do is so intertwined with the rest of the business community, with the education community, with behavioral health, with like a lot of these other sectors, that it's not a canary, but we look and we say, well, how is arts and culture doing? How is the city doing? That's really the question. And then what can we do in order to help that?
And it's been not an even recovery across the arts and cultural sector, right? You've got, some venues and organizations that have recovered faster and maybe are back to their 2019 levels, and those that, maybe were more of a subscription base model with subscribers and you're buying the season for the musicals and plays, they've had a harder time. Is that generally the case in what you're seeing? And is this more about sort of habits that were broken by COVID that just haven't returned in the same way? Or do you think there's like shifts in the underlying preferences of folks when it comes to what they want in an arts and cultural experience?
That's tough. And again, I'll say that this applies probably across a lot of different sectors. And the term that I've been using a lot is neighborhoodization, which really rolls off the tongue. So I'm surprised it hasn't stuck. But the idea that I think throughout COVID, with different opportunities in terms of where people can work, in terms of how people are getting things delivered, in terms of their retail options, in terms of food options. I think that, and this is an unscientific evaluation, but just based off what we've seen in the sector, is that people are more comfortable in a smaller radius around their homes. And
those were habits we built up during COVID, right?
Exactly. Well, and I think they're habits that have been trending for a long time, right? I think that tech and, there's a lot of industries that have really promoted the idea that you can do more from a smaller radius. And, and that was just accentuated so much during COVID. Now, what habits do we settle back into, right? I mean, that's really the $1 trillion question moving forward. But the idea, I think, that organizations and arts and cultural organizations that have either positioned or repositioned themselves as neighborhood opportunities, those organizations have done really well, or they're doing well, or they're engaging with new customers, new patrons that are looking to be local. They're looking to support themselves local. And downtown is a neighborhood, right? The idea that Benaroya Hall is a neighborhood destination, the Fifth Avenue, right? Sam, like all of these are, they're neighborhood spots. And I think that when people really start to think about them as neighborhood destinations, then that really kind of, it re-envisions how they're thinking about engaging with arts and culture. So, yes, museums had a little bit of an easier time because it wasn't one person sitting next to another person sitting next to another person. It was a little bit easier for them to run through the pandemic. But all organizations have been hit hard by these just changes in behavior. But the thing that I think is hopeful is that organizations have seen that change in behavior. And it's not the first time that consumer taste and preferences have shifted in a city or in a market. So the challenge, though, is the pace at which that changed. And when you have a large organization, 50, 60, $70 million, steering that ship takes some time. And so that's why we continue to look for the support of, our local leaders in order to continue to give us that runway in order to, to build towards these new tastes and preferences.
And speaking of that, the end of last year, the King County Council sort of quietly acted. It wasn't, not to say they were sneaky or in any way, but it didn't get a lot of attention in the action they took to pass a measure to pump a fair amount of money into arts and culture throughout King County and in downtown. What will that mean for Seattle and downtown's arts and cultural organizations that may still be, suffering from lower than hoped attendance and revenues and higher than hoped expenses?
Right. Well, and I'm glad you hit on that because I think very often, I'll get back to your question about doors open, but very often the conversation surrounds where are you against 2019 numbers? And it's very often around butts in seats, how many butts do you have in seats now versus 2019? And the question I think that gets glossed over sometimes is where are your expenses versus where they were in 2019. So even for the organizations that are back to those numbers, ArtsFund data has general expenses with, the leader being payroll. at about 25, 26% higher than where it was, several years ago.
Yeah.
So
it's a sector that's not immune to the inflation that we've all experienced, right, over the last 2-3 years.
With ticket prices, we don't always have the flexibility to adjust those in step with inflation as a lot of other organizations or a lot of other sectors do. So, we actually need to be ahead of where we were in 2019. So that's really the goal in order to keep pace with inflation and all the other drivers that are going on in the sector. As far as doors open, that is a wonderful initiative that it's 0.1%, and we'll see anywhere between $80 and $100 million put into the arts and culture sector throughout King County. That is a wonderful recognition of the value of arts and culture within King County, and particularly within Seattle, right? Is it a silver bullet? Absolutely not. When we're talking about 700 organizations, when we're talking about, this was in the report as well, but I think the total budgets for just downtown organizations was in excess of $333 million. And that's just downtown organizations. So when you're looking at King County, that number gets much, much larger. So while it is an impressive number, it is an excellent stake in the ground to say that this county and this region cares about and supports and recognizes the value of arts and culture as a driver of a community. It has to be in concert with private philanthropy, in concert with corporate philanthropy, and more and more ticket buying and getting those butts and seats and through the doors.
Are there things you think the city government can be doing, should be doing here? The county's taken this action, as you mentioned, through the Doors Open initiative and levying a new sales tax to make direct investment. But if you're mayor for a day or two, what are you doing to support this sector in Seattle and maybe more specifically in downtown?
John, you could not pay me enough to be mayor for a day or even an hour, but and my hat's off to Mayor Harrell for taking that job. But the report from TSA outlined 5 primary challenges facing downtown, and those were public safety, accessibility, collaboration, messaging, and funding. I would lean into those first 2, and public safety and accessibility. And in terms of accessibility, I think what is really being talked about is financial accessibility. And the interesting thing about those 2 challenges is that they are sector independent, and no one sector can solve them alone. It takes the collaboration of retail, of hospitality, of arts and culture, of office, of real estate, all together to be really working together in order to let the city know what needs to be done and how they can interject around issues of public safety and in terms of financial accessibility. Because the art sector is not in a position to solve public safety for the city of Seattle. We are not in a position to solve an affordability question or an affordability crisis, depending on how you want to look at it, for residential or commercial rates in downtown Seattle. So, but what we are in a position to do is to work in concert with other downtown sectors to say, hey, this is negatively affecting us in a way that is beyond our capacity to take action. And this is exactly that. I mean, those are exactly the situations in which the city and our public sector can and will step up, in order to support these economic drivers.
Yeah, it was notable, I think, in some ways that, the top thing on the list of key findings from all these interviews with leaders in the arts and cultural sector in downtown was, make sure the streets are safe and welcoming for everybody, for our staff, for our patrons, for artists. And, that's key to continued revitalization and get more people through the doors.
It goes for everything. If you don't feel safe, then everything else is kind of a non-starter.
What was your entry into the arts growing up? Where did you find your passion for arts? I know you were a dancer.
I was.
Were there other artistic pursuits before dancing that you were passionate about?
I'll tell you two funny stories. One, I got into ballet. Neither one of my parents were into the arts at all, but I was born a little pigeon toed. And the doctor suggested that we try ballet in order to help with that. Turns out I was halfway decent and continued. And then one day, I remember this very vividly. I was in the studios in St. Louis, and there was a poster on the wall that said you could go to the Joffrey Ballet School in New York City for 8 weeks, and they had an audition for their summer program, and they had scholarships. And I was dancing, but I wasn't that serious, and I was still pretty young. I can't remember, maybe it was 12 or something like that. And I remember telling my parents, I was like, can I do this? And they were like, listen, if you get a scholarship, you can go. And looking back on it, they did not expect me to get a scholarship at all. I think they were just like, yeah, whatever, man, just go and do it. And so I did it, and I got it. And I spent 8 weeks in New York City by myself,
Wow.
like relatively unsupervised. And I just thought, this is a ticket to a world that I had no clue existed. And shortly after that, I was in boarding school. I went to Interlochen Center for the Arts. And again, another, just layer
away from home
unfolded. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I got to see, what the world looked like outside of my neighborhood. And there was no turning back. The arts took me literally around the world and, created a new view of the world for me. And that's what the arts are capable of for young people, for old people. It can present a different perspective on how you view the things that you've been interacting with every day. And that's just so unique, because I think in today's day and age, whether it's political environment, whether it's an economic environment, being able to recognize someone else's perspective is what we miss a lot.
There's an avenue for you.
Absolutely.
Do you remember telling your parents that you got the scholarship?
Oh, absolutely.
Remember that conversation?
I was so psyched, and I just
I just remember in person, or you call them, or
no, it's in person.
Yeah,
in person, we got the letter. I mean, there's no email at that time, right? So I got the package, and it was how those things go back in the day. It was a thin envelope or a thick envelope, and I got the thick envelope, and it was great. And I remember my parents just kind of shrugging, and being like, "Well, it's all paid for, so I don't know what we can do." And that was the end of it.
They take you there, or they say just find your way, have a good time?
I don't know how much time we've got for stories, but this was way back in the day, right? So they walked me to the gate with more luggage than I could possibly handle as a young person.
They overpacked for you?
Yeah, overpacked. I had the trolley. I got it all on the plane. I got off the plane. I was in New York. No one really picked me up. I just had the trolley, put it in the cab. Ended up.
Wait, how old were you again then?
I couldn't have been any older than 13.
Wow.
Yeah, I was really young. And I look back and be like, what were you guys thinking? How do you say this is okay? But I remember they dropped me off at the corner, and it was the first time since I had been, since I'd been with my parents, that I didn't have a trolley anymore. And I realized, oh, damn.
For your luggage.
Yeah, I was like, I can't carry all this stuff. And there was a guy just kind of at the bodega on the corner at the corner store, and he's like, listen, kid, I'm going to watch your stuff. You walk down to the end of the block, check in, and get someone to help you carry your stuff. And I thought, well, this guy's going to either rob me or he's going to be my best friend for the next 8 weeks. And it turned out to be the latter.
Yeah, to trust your instincts in the moment.
Yeah.
Or else you were...
I was without clothes
for a little bit.
Right, for the next 2 months. So
that's a great story.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun.
What a number of lessons I bet you learned in those first couple of days. And
as a parent, you think it sink or swim, but yeah, it was. And I managed to swim.
So looking back on the last, I guess it's now almost 4 years that you've been in this role here in Seattle. What's been most rewarding? What's been most challenging for you?
Rewarding, I've got to say, between the funds that we were able to distribute from Washington State Department of Commerce and the 2 rounds that we've had from the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation, we've been able to interject an additional $30 million plus into the sector to
across the state, right?
700 organizations, or just shy of 700 organizations in 37 out of 39 counties.
Wow.
That is meaningful, right? And it's been meaningful for organizations. It's been the difference between doors open and doors closed. I always like to say it like this sometimes. It's meant food on the table and roofs over the heads of people that work in the cultural sector. That I think is really what it boils down to. There's a lot of data that shows, what arts and culture do for communities in terms of educational attainment, in terms of, civic engagement. But it's also important to remember that these funds pay the salaries of people that work in this important field. And back in the middle of COVID, and there was so much going on, and people were really struggling. And I feel really proud of the fact that we were able to help steward those dollars and get them to people at a time when they really needed that, just as human beings.
Yeah. And bringing up memories of how screwed up the unemployment system was at the state. So, those other dollars like those were real helpful to folks being able to pay their rent and put food on the table.
Every dollar mattered.
So you all served as this really significant conduit between different levels of government that were appropriating dollars to support the sector, but making sure they got into the hands of the different organizations and individuals, as you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, in addition to the public sector, we also had a lot of private sector dollars, and, our own, additional $5 million, I think, that we've been in, for COVID relief back at the beginning of all that. And, our additional, general allocations and our Youth Access Opportunity Fund, all the dollars that we typically put out, but it adds up and it matters.
And all of those, I assume, have been distributed, allocated. There's not a lot that you're left sitting on. There's not a lot that others are hoping that's coming down the pike. So what organizations are facing now are their own realities around their finances and budgets and who's coming through the doors and our costs. There's not more government money or philanthropic money that you're doling out here.
Well, I mean, this year we're also, we're in the middle of launching on February 5th. Actually, our program opens the second round of the Community Accelerator Grant, which is an additional $10 million.
Your regular grant making, right. Yeah, so not
from
pandemic related.
Not pandemic related. Yeah. But it is important to know that within arts and culture, it is a, multi-legged stool, right? There's earned income and there's contributed, and that contributed comes from the public sector, the private sector, institutional funding, and that maintains, right? That model, that funding model maintains whether it's emergency pandemic funding or not.
So what's been most challenging over these last, 3.5, 4 years?
I say this to my staff a lot, and I think it's true. The most challenging role that we have at ArtsFund right now is being able to do everything. The demand for what we do in terms of capacity building, in terms of advocacy, in terms of grant making is limitless. And, we are a 54, almost 55-year-old organization. We have a lot of history in the community. We've done a lot, but it seems to us like the opportunity for us to expand and to, make sure that our services are available to everyone is limitless right now. And that goes for here in downtown, that goes for King County, that goes for Greater Puget Sound, the entire state, the region. I got to say, I spoke to a group of about 40, I think, individuals from across the world through an initiative with the World Affairs Council and the U.S. State Department, and they were all arts and culture, representatives from Uganda and from the UK and from Italy and Greece. And I gave them a presentation about what ArtsFund was, and the hand shot up there. It's like, can you do this in our country? Can you do, So
because they don't have the same model.
Yeah, the model doesn't exist in a lot of places. So I think when you say what is the main challenges, I think the main challenge is how do we scale capacity in a way that can meet demand? Because the demand, no matter how much money we pump into things, there's more demand that's out there. So it's a problem you want to have, but it also leaves you feeling like, oh man, I could always do more.
And you all have gone through what in the last 2 years or so, a new strategic planning process to sort of orient your work around a couple of new priorities, still anchored around your mission. What changes for ArtsFund as you look ahead from where you've been as an organization over your?
As I mentioned, ArtsFund we were founded in 1969, post World Fair. With the intent of really being a conduit for the corporate community to help establish an arts and culture community here in Seattle. And over that time, we have been a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? When we first started, we were only corporate dollars. We, through the days of Peter Donnelly and Jim Toon, and then Mari Harita opened it up, and we really started doing more individual contributions and interacting more with private philanthropy. And today, I think we're at a point where we really want to be leaning into the idea that it takes geographically, I think Seattle and the rest of Washington are as intertwined now as they have ever been. So the idea of supporting arts and culture here is, it fits in with the idea of supporting arts and culture in Tacoma or in Kitsap County or in Island County or in Yakima or in Spokane.
Mm-hmm.
So really understanding and, for us as an organization, trying to understand what is that interconnectedness and how can we support that moving forward so that, the artists have a place to practice throughout the entire state of Washington.
How do you rank, or how do you think Seattle's, and thinking of kind of the greater downtown, our arts and cultural sector and what we've got here, how does it stack up and compare to other U.S. cities and peer cities? And do you think we fully appreciate what we've got when it comes to the arts and cultural assets in our city?
No way. We don't appreciate it to the level. It is, world class is kind of a dated term these days, but it is. The institutions that are here hold their own against any producing institutions that I've ever seen across the world. And that goes, from the museum and the ballet and the opera and the theater to neighborhood organizations to the accessibility of traveling shows that are coming through here. That goes to any type of arts and culture engagement that you're going to get here. It also goes to the density, which is one thing that we're looking at for our next research study. But even as a city as a whole, the amount of arts and culture that you have access to here is really, I don't want to say it's unparalleled, but it is on par with a number of other great cities across the world.
With probably bigger populations.
Much bigger populations.
Than we've got here in Seattle.
Much longer histories, right? And we're talking around the world. You're talking about European cities that have had a history of arts and culture for centuries. And so I think that not only do we hold our own, but we really can compete across a lot of these levels. So get out there and see it, right? It's good. It's very, very good. One of the questions that you guys had on the prompt, right, was around like what is endured in the sector, and I got to say quality, right? That has not gone anywhere, and if anything, it's increased because the consumer has said it's going to take a lot to get us out these days.
I'll get off the couch, but it's got to be great.
Everyone has stepped up, right?
Yeah.
All of the institutions have stepped up, and they said, all right, if you want the best of the best, that's what we're going to give to you.
Yeah.
And so, get out there and see it and know that what you're seeing is, you don't have to go to New York. You don't have to go to London. You can see it right here in your back door.
And it might be here first before it ends up in New York, right?
Absolutely.
Our friends at the Fifth and what they produce, and
that's
before it hits Broadway.
Yep.
What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What draws you out?
Oh, I have to be so. We support 700 organizations across the state of Washington.
You can't pick favorites.
I can't have favorites, right? But I will say that ArtsFund is hosting a group at Pacific Northwest Ballet next week. We're going to go take some folks to see Swan Lake, a cultural treasure. We had Sam the other weekend. What's going on at Fifth Avenue is fantastic. It's really hard to pick a favorite, and I think it depends on the moment, right? I mean, all of us, like, sometimes you feel like this, sometimes you feel like that, and that's what's neat about Seattle is that it's all here. Depending on how you feel, you can go outside and find it.
Is there something in this sector that's coming or on the horizon that excites you that we all ought to know about or keep our eyes on? Is there something kind of out there coming to Seattle that maybe we haven't heard about, but it's on your radar?
Again, there's so much. Right. And it really depends on individual preferences. And so what I would recommend to folks is to just keep your finger on the pulse of the organization or the type of organization that you're looking for, and there will be something. There's always something coming on, whether it's dance or whether it's theater or whether it's opera or visual art or any type of community art that may be through a community or neighborhood center that is not necessarily one of the disciplines that we normally think of. Reach out to those organizations and find out what's happening. This is what I like. Tell them this is what I like. This is what I'm interested in, and they'll point you in the right direction. So I'm dancing a little bit around it, but I always get in trouble when I name people. So.
Don't pick a favorite child. We understand. You all for many years have produced studies around the economic impact of arts in our community, tax revenue, jobs, the sector's significance relative to others, and sometimes it goes unnoticed or underappreciated. And you've also put out work around the social impact of the arts. What do you mean by that? What should people know and appreciate around, if they don't already, around the social impact? Yeah,
I would say everyone should get on our website, artsfund.org, look at the research studies that we've done. As you mentioned, we've done economic impact studies since the early 90s. In 2019, we launched our social impact study, which I'll get into that in a little bit. And then in 2022, we had data collected throughout the pandemic that we launched around our COVID cultural impact study. So we have a lot of data. We have it available publicly for everyone to check out, use it for your own internal knowledge, and also use it for advocacy in terms of being able to tell your public sector or your corporate stakeholders, this is what arts means to my community. So that's why we produce it. I think when it comes to our social impact, or the social impact of the arts, it is, I don't want to say almost limitless, but when you're talking about educational attainment, one of the stats that came out of that study was the idea that at risk, and you can read and how that is defined, but at-risk students involved in the arts were 23 percentage points more likely to attend college than peers with low art involvement, right? 23%, like that's huge. And we all know what the benefit of college attainment is in other areas of a community or higher education. Something else that we looked at is the idea that within behavioral health or within physical health, something like 45% of medical institutions nationwide offered some type of arts programming, and out of them, like 8 out of 10 of those institutions said that they had significant benefit to patient recovery. There are statistics that show that arts involvement is connected to better civic and voting participation, right? And so there's so many different ways that arts and culture are affecting your community, whether you're that butt in the seat or not. And I think that's what's really important to recognize, and you can tell from some of these studies, is that having a certain amount of arts and cultural density in your community is good for you. It's good for your children. It's good for the people that are around you. You don't have to know, what's coming to, an XYZ organization next week or next month. It doesn't have to be something that you are engaged in a daily basis. It still makes your life better. And that's why we need to be advocating for it in our communities, because irrespective of your level of involvement, the arts are making your life a better place.
Hear, hear. We've got a couple of standard questions on the podcast, Michael. Your first job that you took a paycheck for, was it in arts or some other sector?
So I did do an obligatory stint at McDonald's. I didn't make it very long, but it was one right up the
behind
street.
The counter or behind the fryer?
It was the fryer, man. It didn't. It didn't go well. But I'll tell you, the one that I think about often is my father was a big golfer, and I was young, man. Like, I mean, I hope I'm not throwing my parents under the bus with all these stories, but he would put me out on the par 3. And we would jump the fence, and we had 2 big igloo containers of lemonade that we would bring out, and I would sell lemonade, small, medium, and large cups, and
unauthorized sales.
Completely unauthorized, right? But I think there was a deal going on somewhere with the course owner. And I remember at a period of time, we must have been pulling in $200, $300 a weekend. This is in the early 80s. And I don't think I ever saw a dime. I got like maybe a new bike or a basketball or something.
It went straight to your parents?
I'm pretty sure it went to pay for the green fees. Is what I think it went towards. I think that was part of the deal. But it was also a lesson, right? It taught me how to manage a P&L sheet, and it taught me how to to look at expenses and how to sell, right? And that was something that my father was really good at. So that's kind of the first.
Did you get to swing a club out there at all?
I was never very good, so I was encouraged not to.
Yeah,
but
just sling the lemonade.
Yeah, I was. By the time they made it to the par 3, most of the guys were pretty thirsty. So.
And our final question is, what's your perfect Saturday in the Pacific Northwest, in the Seattle area? Yeah. What are you doing? There's
so many, right? So I had a hard time thinking of one, but I'll give you an idea. Getting up and starting the day with a double shot espresso is just incredible, right? And there are if I named any one place in town, I would get emails from the other 700 places, right? So I will say whichever one is on the list that day, but starting with that.
Well, you got a favorite place on the island that we should know about in Winslow?
Well, I will say Bainbridge Island Museum of Art is a great place.
But coffee places too.
They do a great.
Oh, they do?
They do a great espresso.
You're getting art and coffee.
It's kind of a one-stop shop. But I'll say down in Seattle, I love spending my Saturdays at Seattle Art Museum, and it really depends on the month, right? And which venue, because I think for those who don't know, you've got the downtown location, you've got Seattle Asian Art Museum up in Ballantine Park, and then
somewhat recently renovated and reopened, right?
Yeah. It's the original location, right?
Yeah,
and then you got the sculpture park. So depending on whether it's a beautiful day in the summer or it's a rainy and gray day, you can kind of cozy up downtown, or you can be literally out in nature. And the thing that I really like about SAM or museums in general is that, and I'm a big kind of history buff, and I like looking at some of the antiquity pieces. And what I love about it is that it's a constant reminder that no matter what happens, arts will survive. Right? I mean, when you look at a piece that is thousands of years old, and you think of the wars and the plagues and the violence and the political upheaval that has happened over that period of time, yet here we are. So, we are fighting for something that, we want to continue, but at the same time, it is so baked into our humanity that it's not going anywhere. And I like to be reminded of that. So, I think an afternoon at SAM, and then I got to say a late lunch at Chundu Taste. This is the one place that I'm going to name because that is one of my favorite Sichuan places in town. And we go there and get the lamb on a stick and some of the popcorn chicken is a great way to spend the late afternoon. And then the fifth. And the reason I say that, and I'm not naming it as a personal favorite, because there's a lot of great organizations out there, but it is the one that my family can agree on that we all love. So between my wife, my daughter, my son, and myself,
you can find some consensus.
Exactly, we can find consensus, and no one goes home upset. So.
Well, that sounds like a great day, bookended by two great art and cultural experiences, and some great food in between. Well, thanks for making time for this conversation, coming on the podcast, Michael, and for what you do and what you've done over the last, almost 4 years now in Seattle to help a ton of organizations, not just in our city, but around the county and around the state, weather probably the toughest set of circumstances they faced in many, many decades. And so many of them are still standing, and so many artists still employed because of what you've done, and we get to all still take part in it. So a big hats off to you and your organization and your great team.
Well, thanks for having me, John, and thanks for all that you do and the role that Downtown Seattle Association plays in making this city the vibrant hub that it is, not just for the region, but for the entire state.
Appreciate that. Well, hope you enjoyed my conversation with Michael. Appreciate him making time to come on Seattle City Makers, and Appreciate his service as well as a member of the board of the Downtown Seattle Association and the perspective he brings to our board and our work on behalf of the incredible arts and cultural sector we have here in downtown Seattle. We're so fortunate to have the rich collection of venues and artists and creators and the individuals leading these great institutions and organizations in our downtown. So thanks again to Michael for making time. I want to close out, as I do each and every episode, with a recommendation of something you got to check out in downtown Seattle. And I want to highlight Dexter Yard, a terrific new-ish development by Biomed Realty on Dexter Avenue, just north of Mercer. We did a member event for Downtown Seattle Association members earlier this week, so I got to go check that out. And it's a highly amenitized building with lab and office space upstairs and some great retail, food and beverage, and recreation at the ground floor. And they'll soon be opening a new beer hall, SLU Brew, I think in 3 weeks or so. And a speakeasy. They've got this great field house, a big basketball court, and they're doing pickleball. Bunch of different things going on at the ground level, a coffee shop. It's a beautiful building, beautiful development, and encourage you to check it out. And their hospitality and amenity provider and partner is Gourmando. They do a great job, and you'll soon be able to check out the beer hall. It looked like the beer list was very extensive and well-stocked with some good Northwest brews. So check out Dexter Yard and the SLU Brew Beer Hall opening in a few weeks. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on this episode of Seattle City Makers, presented by the Downtown Seattle Association with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.